my screen here. So thank you for the opportunity, certainly. And I did also want to give a shout out to my colleague, Amy. She's going to be here to help with the presentation and certainly help field questions. And she is our senior forester in the Southern region, so helping us build and develop the Family Forest Carbon Program in the Southern region. So, hey, Amy. I always feel like it's helpful just to start by grounding ourselves in the opportunity. Why, for example, AFF and the Nature Conservancy decided to design this program specifically for family forest owners. And we're really grounded in the science, right? So this is pulled from a paper that was published in the National Academy of Sciences in 2018. And it's basically assessing the opportunities for natural climate solutions to contribute to mitigation opportunities, particularly if we want to stay on a 2-degree pathway by the end of the decade. And you can see from this graph that actually over 30% of the necessary mitigation can be, or natural climate solutions can contribute up to that amount. So we really feel like it has to be a part of the solution if we have any chance of staying on a 1.5 or 2-degree pathway. And that's really the role of forests, particularly family forests in our eyes, right, is to be that bridge to more permanent solutions in the future. So what does that look like within the US? What's the domestic opportunity? Similar, this research went further to kind of assess the opportunities, the land-based opportunities in the US. And you can see here that forests, particularly reforestation and natural forest management, which is basically another way of saying improved forest management, if you're familiar with some of the existing forest carbon projects out there, not only provide some of the greatest mitigation opportunities in terms of total carbon potential, total volume, but also in terms of cost effectiveness. So that the shading on the bars here correlates to the cost to actually deploy that mitigation opportunity. So forests have the greatest sort of absolute potential contribution and some of the most cost-effective solutions as it relates to other land-based natural climate solutions in the US. Translating that to the marketplace, so you can see here what's in orange are the emissions reductions available on voluntary and compliance markets through forests, through either reforestation or improved forest management today. And what's represented in the green bar is kind of turning that graph, that graphical representation I just showed in the last slide, into potential, right? So this is if we are able to capitalize on natural climate solutions and find appropriate methodologies to access those opportunities, then we could contribute emission reductions, something akin to a verified credit unit, BCU, right? In these particular volumes, right? So more than doubling what we're seeing transacted on the marketplace today. That said, traditionally, there's a lot of inequitable market access. So family forest owners have largely been unable to access carbon markets. Traditional forest carbon projects just aren't working for them. And what you can see here in this graph is that the current registered forest carbon projects in the light blue are largely made up of individual parcels greater than 5,000 acres. But the darker blue is actually the family forest ownership. So very few family forest owners own 5,000 acres or more, right? They can't capitalize on the economies of scale that are necessary to make a traditional forest carbon project pencil out, and therefore are unable to access these opportunities. So not only does that leave a lot of untapped potential mitigation out there, unrealized, but it also means that forest land and small family forest owners are not able to realize these alternative revenue streams that really could help them further their stewardship and conservation goals. Why is this? I talked a little bit about some of the cost barriers. Very specifically, it's the high cost of inventory, and then the carrying cost, sort of the ongoing administration of monitoring, reporting, and verification. Those all really, in order to pencil out, you need to capitalize on economies of scale. And that's what we've tried to solve through our program. Another big thing that presents a barrier to entry is lack of technical assistance. So landowners need help navigating the carbon market confusion, trying to understand the different forest carbon project opportunities out there, what the costs are, what the potential revenue is, or could be rather, and even how that then relates to their own personal objectives. The last barrier to entry is just this risk of market volatility, particularly in a seemingly complex market like carbon markets. So landowners, how some of these traditional forest carbon projects are established is that landowners receive a percentage of the revenue from the monetization of their carbon rights. And so that might vary year to year. They get a certain amount in the first year, maybe they don't see much more after that. Just a lot of market volatility in the past that has been just difficult for small landowners to navigate. So that's one of the reasons why AFF and the Nature Conservancy came together to build the Family Forest Carbon Program. So we were specifically focused on how to build a program and a forest carbon accounting methodology that would work for small landowners. That's not to say like large landowners can also use this methodology, but our measure of success is whether or not we can effectively engage family forest owners in this small forest landowner audience. We also, being mission-driven organizations, are also hoping to meaningfully contribute climate mitigation. And so we have an ambitious goal to sequester and store 1 billion tons by 2050. We also are safeguarding our practices in our program to protect all of these other co-benefits that are equally important, including wildlife habitat, overall forest health, sustainable wood supplies, water quality, etc. So these things are all very important for us as we build out opportunities for landowners. For landowners themselves, our program provides funding, so obviously incentive payments to implement these practices, support, so we connect landowners with natural resource professionals, whether they are our staff foresters, folks like Amy and others that will build out in the southern region, or resources to support the consulting foresters that landowners would like to work with. Maybe they have a pre-existing relationship, or they're familiar with a consulting forester in their community and they want to work with that person instead of our staff forester. That's completely fine. We promote that for sure, and provide landowners with resources to get management plans written, and individual visits with consulting foresters through our program. So that happens in addition to the incentive payment or the funding that they would receive to sign up and implement the practice. We also, I mentioned this in the other slide, but it's worth just kind of connecting it. We're also, again, promoting sustainable forest management practices. So yes, they have a measurable, or we hope that they have a measurable carbon benefit associated with them, but they also have other sustainable forest benefits that help that landowner also achieve their objectives. So we are looking to increase the productivity, the resiliency, the overall conservation benefit of the landowner's individual forest. Right now, program eligibility, we are targeting landowners that own more than 30 forested acres. Our program is currently operational in the Central Appalachians, which includes all of Pennsylvania, all of West Virginia, and Western Maryland. We are open in all of Vermont in our Northeast module, Western Massachusetts, and Eastern New York. We are also available in the Northwoods region of the Midwest, which includes portions of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. We're expanding in the Northeast, actually in all 3 of these regions, in 2023. And then, of course, Amy and her team are working to provide some opportunities in the South in 2023 as well. Our current forest conditions, our program eligibility is also determined by the landowner's current forest conditions. And that is just specific to whatever practice that landowner is potentially eligible for. So essentially, there are just biophysical properties of the landowner's property that determine whether or not they're eligible for our various practices. Another kind of visual representation of where we're currently operating. I think some of my circles got a little bit moved, but basically what I just articulated in the last slide, we're open in the Central Appalachians, hoping to expand into Eastern Ohio, all of New York State, into New Hampshire and possibly Maine by the end of this year. And then all of Michigan, most of Wisconsin, and into Minnesota by the end of this year as well. And then Amy, again, like I said, Amy and her team are working hard to get us some Southern practices that we could operate on a pilot level by the end of the year. How does it work for a landowner? Essentially, a landowner sees an advertisement, they hear from a referral, a peer landowner, they might even hear from their consulting forester that opportunities are available in their region. They go online, they visit the website, they find their property using a mapping tool that we've developed. And what that first step helps us do is to use a filter that has the various biophysical characteristics that I was talking about to give us an initial assessment of the qualification or the eligibility of that particular property. If that property is deemed to be eligible, at least from that first qualification exercise, they'll speak with a representative. Eventually, they'll connect with a natural resource professional, whether that's somebody on our staff, again, or a consulting forester who's been approved and learned a little bit more about the program. They review if again, everything seems like it's continuing to be eligible, like they qualify for the opportunity. They'll get an estimate for their payment and also receive and review their contract. Once that's signed, they get their first payment. Now we give them a schedule of payments throughout their contract period, but they'll get their first payment and then work with their forester to develop a forest management plan if necessary, or perhaps it's an addendum or whatever updates they might need to their forest management plan. Some terms in the landowner agreement. So these right now, our practices are 20-year contracts for landowners. The practice length will depend on the practices that we developed. So it's possible that we could create some practices that have contract terms that are less than 20 years. It's also possible that we could develop practices that would have more than 20 years. But right now, our practices that are currently available have 20-year contracts. And that we're trying to basically minimize the commitment for landowners, the contract terms, as much as possible, while also ensuring that as a program, we're generating enough of a carbon benefit that we can monetize to recoup the cost of administering the program. So we have a set payment throughout the contract period. We just launched a program refinement where the schedule of those payments is negotiable. So we had a set schedule and learned from landowners that own their land for various purposes that maybe they'd like to front load some of their payments or the reverse. So we do have a flexible schedule, which is exciting. A landowner has to complete some requirements. We're developing basically a simple attestation form that just keeps us updated with what's going on the ground. Maybe there's considering putting their property up for sale or, some other forest management activities that they're contemplating. So we require landowners to fulfill those requirements, just kind of keep the program up to date. In addition to that, we are also monitoring these properties. We have a sample of these properties that we're doing intensive monitoring on. But for those properties that are not part of that monitoring sample, we're still doing some remote monitoring just to make sure that we're keeping an eye on what's going on the ground. And if there's anything that triggers through that, we can go back and talk to the landowner, pull up their attestation form and try to get to the bottom of things. Through the contract term, the Family Forest Carbon Program will own the rights to the carbon in the project area. That's what we're then taking the responsibility of doing the monitoring, reporting, and verification, and ultimately issuing the verified carbon units. And like I said before, we may visit the property periodically to conduct monitoring. It's difficult to know when a landowner, actually it's impossible to know when a landowner is first signing up for the program if they're going to be selected as a monitoring plot. because that happens through our kind of randomized sampling tool. So we don't know until after the landowner is rolled if they're going to be one of our monitoring samples, or one of our samples for the monitoring cohort. That's a pretty benign process. We just go in and set up a couple of monitoring plots akin to like an FIA plot, if you will. So it usually just requires staking the center of the plots with rebar, and that's pretty much it. Just accessing the property in every verification event to take measurements of those particular plots. The technical support, again, that we receive from that landowners receive from our forestry professionals. Again, these can be staff foresters or consulting foresters who have signed up through our program, but they have site visits with landowners. In some cases, they have Zoom conference calls or phone calls, depending on where the landowner's at and or what their preference might be. We do offer tailored forest management plans. So that is, again, resources in addition to the landowner incentive payment. These foresters, of course, tie these practices to the goals that the landowners have for their property and other forest health issues. So how these can contribute to enhanced wildlife habitat, for example, or high quality wood supplies into the future, that kind of thing. So far, we have enrolled, actually, this is a little bit outdated. I think we're close to 45,000 acres enrolled in the program. We've committed over $10 million to landowners through the lifetime of their contracts. 125,000 acres have received technical assistance. So even though they haven't yet signed up for the program, they've still had access to that resource professional before they've agreed to the contract. And we have another 800,000 acres in the pipeline. So whether they're still kind of considering their opportunities, they've talked with our one of our representatives who's not necessarily a forester, or even one of our natural resource professionals. They're somewhere in our landowner pipeline. What are landowners saying about the program? So I'm just pulling some direct quotes here from landowners that we've talked to post-enrollment. A lot are finding that the technical assistance, the access to the technical assistance is really helpful. We had done some preliminary analysis on who our enrollees were, and I think more than 2/3 of our enrollees had not had a forest management plan in the past, or had very limited access or conversations to foresters or natural resource professionals. So pretty new to management, maybe had done long-term management, maybe had done some isolated harvesting or other forest activity in the past, but not with the guidance of a natural resource professional. Others are finding this program really helpful to help with stewardship or maintenance costs, like property taxes. That's sort of alleviating some of the burden they're experiencing there. And others are just finding it really valuable to be a part of a bigger, impactful program in their community. I wanted to take a second to touch on this conversation that's been swirling really for the past couple of years, but certainly it's been a heightened conversation over the last month or so on high quality forest carbon credits or forest carbon projects. So I know many of you have probably read some of the media conversation, and certainly the cascade of conversation that has come from the Guardian article in particular. And just naming that AFF and TNC have a commitment to produce high quality carbon credits through our program. We ultimately want to provide material mitigation. And so it has been an important program designed for us to make sure that we're providing, that we're following the latest and greatest science, learning and improving the program, not just for the landowner's sake of things, right, program delivery, but also the science and carbon accounting methodology, because we want to stand by the integrity of the claims that we're making. So I want to just touch on a couple of reasons, or excuse me, a couple of ways in which we've invested in the high quality commitment. And that's first and foremost through the carbon accounting methodology that we developed. So this is a really cool innovation that we feel like sort of raises the bar on additionality and ensuring that the claims we're making are actually contributing to additional carbon storage and sequestration. And we do that first by establishing a baseline using a matching process. So the best example that we use is in the medical community. When you're trying to assess the efficacy of a specific medical intervention, you'll have your test group, which will receive the medical intervention, whether that's a vaccine or some kind of drug. And then you'll develop a cohort of like individuals, very, very similar individuals that don't receive the intervention. And so you'll establish this control group based on a number of variables which determine their likeness to the test group, the folks who are getting that intervention. So you'll control for things like age, gender, medical history, those types of things, right? To try to get your groups to be as close as possible. So that's what we're doing in the forest space. We're setting up our test group, which is the monitoring plots, the monitoring sample of landowners enrolled in our program, with a control group, which is pulled from forest inventory and analysis data plots. So we have a series of 14 or suite of 14 different variables, which assesses the likeness of these FIA plots to the control plots. And these include things like forest type, slope, elevation, soils. I don't have them all memorized, but again, 14 different variables, which we have deemed, which we have determined contribute to their statistical likeness to our enrolled properties or our test group. And from there, we actually measure through each verification event. We'll update this control group with the latest and greatest FIA data. And we can see what the difference is after a landowner has implemented the intervention, which is the forest management activity. What is the difference in the test group in our enrolled properties and what's going on in the control group? And it's that difference over time that is attributed to the intervention itself and thus the potential carbon benefit. So maybe another way to look at this graphically, the green line would be folks who are enrolled in our program. They're implementing a specific forest management activity. The yellow line is what's going on in the control group, the baseline. They're not implementing our specific activity, our practice that follows a silvicultural prescription. And what you see is the difference between the green shaded area is the difference between the carbon stored and sequestered in the enrolled property plots. So we've really isolated the impact of that intervention. And if for whatever reason, there is we see the baseline actually not diverging very much from our enrolled properties, then you would see no credits issued, right? That green shading would disappear. And in fact, what we anticipate is actually over the first couple of years before the trees have had a chance to respond to the intervention itself, we actually don't anticipate that there will be much divergence in some of these practices. And so that's one of the drivers of the contract term length itself, right? We need to have a minimum contract length in order to produce enough carbon to be able to monetize and administer the program. This actually, I'm just going to stay on this graph for a minute. What this graph also represents is a very rough illustration of the practice that we first launched with in the Central Appalachians called growing mature forest. And basically what that practice is an avoided high grading practice. So common practice in that region is to obviously participate in a high grade. And what we're asking landowners to do is to not engage in a high grade, and then they can't reduce their basal area by more than 25% in the contract period. So they can still harvest under growing mature forests. We just are limiting the harvest and also preventing them from taking the biggest trees, right? So what you'll see here, just representing in this graph, is that by the end of the contract period, the landowner should have a larger, more productive higher quality forest that overall has more value too. So increasing the forest health, productivity, and ultimately value by the end of the contract period. One of the other ways that we're committed to high quality is really standing by the 100-year permanence commitment. So we, of course, follow I neglected to say this, but our methodology is verified or is validated by Verra's Verified Carbon Standard. So, of course, we follow the guidance and rules set forth by VCS, but we're also investing in a couple of ways that go above and beyond so that we can really feel like we're standing by our claim for 100-year permanence. The first is developing a really robust and engaged landowner community. We know when landowners are engaged that they're more likely to stay active in forest management. They're more likely to continue adopting the sustainable forest management behavior. And they're, continuing to learn from one another and sort of seek value, not just on their current practice, but on other additional forest management concepts with like-minded individuals. We're also going to remotely monitor all of our enrolled properties, not just for compliance within the contract period, but then also post-contract period, look for change detection. So are these landowners starting to revert back to the unsustainable behavior? And are we starting to see a loss in the carbon that we've claimed initially in the contract period over time? And if we do, which hopefully we don't for a variety of reasons, then the program is committed to compensate for reversals or carbon losses. So what's the opportunity for foresters? As I mentioned, we have sort of staff foresters as part of the program who are able to meet with landowners and help them throughout their contract process. But we also have just as many consultants, actually more consultants, working with us doing this same work, right? Meeting with landowners, qualifying their property just to determine eligibility, talking with them, learning more about their objectives, assessing whether or not this is even the right program for them, and then also helping them draft a management plan and actually implement the practice if necessary over time. So some of these foresters can bring their clients to us, just suggesting, hey, we think we have some folks who might actually be interested in this. And then some of the consulting foresters, we bring landowner leads to them. So that's one of the worth noting, right? This is an opportunity if you're an approved forester to grow your business and to have access to new clients. So that's certainly a perk. And there is, again, resources for the landowners to pay these consultants to come visit and to draft their management plan. There's a lot more resources for foresters available on the familyforestcarbon.org website. There's a whole section on the website for foresters. You can also see the very detailed practice specifications. So we have 5 practices available right now, 1 in that Central Appalachian region, 2 in the Northeast, and then 2 in the Midwest. And they all have very specific prescriptions associated with them. And that's all detailed on the website in that forester section. So I would go ahead and check that out if you're intrigued. And a final shout out. So we are expanding in the Northeast and we're trying to get more consulting foresters involved. We actually have a backlog of landowners in the Northeast and we're trying to get them visited and connected and their eligibility assessed. So we'd love to have more consultants participate. And we have a couple of trainings coming up. I guess it's February today, so this is next week. So more information that we can certainly share. I can share this flyer. This is just a screenshot of the flyer that we're circulating, but can certainly share more information on this particular workshop if folks on this call are interested in participating. And with that, Amy, I'm actually just going to call on you and see if there's anything you would like to mention or share before we open it up for questions.
No, I will say it's so nice to see so many familiar names on this webinar. A lot of you have journeyed through some of the forestry practices that we've done in North Carolina that are new and exciting. And I feel the same way about this carbon program. And so I know you're on board. Just as a little kind of inspiration on my part, foresters, we are used to planning for the long term. We're used to legacy timelines, whereas I think society at large sometimes struggles with that timeline. And so I see a lot of potential in weaving in the carbon markets into standard forestry practices. And so thanks for everyone who believes that too and is here with us to learn. We have a ton of questions in the chat, which I started to answer, but I think we'll probably just lean on answering live. And thanks again to Christine for taking the time today to be with us.
Yeah, Christine, you did a great job kind of giving the full arc from the motivation to some of the key details. And so thank you both for being on. And I know, Amy, you kind of tackled a couple of these questions, but I want to make sure that I call some of them out so everybody hears. One of the first questions that came in was about combining acreages or landowners. So if you had a 20-acre parcel and a 25-acre parcel, could you put them together? And Amy, I saw you had a response, but maybe you could just repeat it.
Yeah, that comes up often. I think about it a lot as we are looking into expanding into the South. We have a lot of concerns about reaching underserved landowners and that sort of thing. So it's something that we actively consider. It's a challenge because a lot, this is a financial program, and there are, lines that are associated with parcels that are also associated with taxation and that sort of thing. Definitely open to hearing more examples about the conversations you are having with your neighbors. What does that feel like to you? Is that something that you would be willing to tackle in terms of like not deed level, but close to it, and let us figure that out, because that's something that I know I'm interested in. Christine, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say we are currently developing, I don't even know that you know this yet, Amy, because we haven't unveiled it yet on our team, but we're currently developing guidance for, we're running into, at least in the Central Appalachians, a number of familial ownerships, right? Where there's contiguous parcels that are owned by, one of them might be owned by an LLC, one might be owned by the brother, one might be owned, but they're related and they're sort of managed as a single forest management unit. And they might be, some of them are probably less than 30 acres. So we're currently developing guidance to make that possible, and are also certainly interested in thinking about how we could aggregate landowners that maybe don't own, that are not tied, they're not relatives necessarily. It does get a little bit challenging if you're considering managing them as different forest management units. So that just makes it a little bit more challenging. So we'll just have to kind of dig into those use cases for you. And then Amy also mentioned that we do have a commitment to providing a more inclusive program. And as part of that, actually our DEI director, Tatiana Height, is trying to build a pilot program where we could lower the acreage threshold for certain communities. So we don't know how that's going to work, but we're super open to trying it because it's an important thing to attempt.
Yeah, great. And just there was a question that came in just to clarify. So the acreage range we're talking about is sort of 30 acres with some exceptions, et cetera, to 5,000 acres.
Yeah, we actually don't have an acre ceiling on our property. So some, that's probably what we're going to see, right? Because if you're 5,000 or greater, you might be interested in some of those other IFM methodologies or programs. Having said that, we do have a couple of really large landowners who are interested in our program rather, just because it aligns with their personal ethic or objectives.
Great. And again, Amy sort of answered this in the chat, but just to pull it out, how the Family Forest Carbon Program integrates with use valuation taxation programs like in North Carolina, for example, but are pretty common across the East.
Yeah. Amy, did you do you want me to speak? Sorry, it sounds like you answered that. Do you want to just reiterate
Well,
it?
Yes, I will say. So, most of our practices in quantifying the carbon do include timber stand improvement. And that, of course, would fall under a timber present use value system. And so that would align. I would just make sure that the exact practices do align, because with the carbon, we are very tight on our quantification for reasons you might imagine. And so we do have, some flexibility there, but we want to make sure that aligns. And also the timelines, of course, need to align. If you have a full harvest scheduled in less than your agreement with Family Forest Carbon Program, that wouldn't work clearly. So I'm excited to say that like a lot of the forestry programs that are popping up, it's really meant to align with people who are thinking about active forest management. Christine, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you said it really well, Amy. And I can say that the 5 practices we currently have in various states, we've worked to ensure that all 5 of them are compatible with their current use program. So that's something that we're going to continue to do as we build out more practices. As Amy said, there's obviously situations, right? You're going to want to make sure that they're not always compatible in every single situation. Depending on when there might be a harvest schedule, what the stocking density or the stand age of that particular forest are. But there is opportunity for them to be compatible, and that's important to us.
Yeah, great. No, that's really crucial because of the impact of taxes. And I think there were some other questions related, but I'm just going to kind of go in order here. And I want to touch on the potential for third-party certification. In this case, it's a question about FSC, but it would apply to SFI probably equally as well. So is there, do you have examples of already, or are you sort of thinking about how third-party certification can fit into the Family Forest Carbon Program?
Yeah, as maybe many of you know, AFF is also the national sponsor of the American Tree Farm System, so very familiar with forest certification systems. And our program currently does not require a forest certification program. So it's absolutely compatible with participation in those programs. Ultimately, it's not our ability to produce an additional carbon benefit is that's kind of on the onus is on the program to establish practices that do indeed kind of move the needle and provide that additional carbon benefit. And we have the ability to, again, match landowners through our methodology across what I'm kind of stereotyping as the management spectrum. So you can match landowners who are, I hate saying this, I hate labeling, but poor stewards with FIA plots that similarly represent variables of potentially poor stewardship. And if we assume that our certified landowners represent some of the best stewards, then again, we would match FIA plots that also represent that good stewardship. And so what we're looking for is the delta between, again, the control plots and the enrolled property plots. So absolutely compatibility across management spectrum, including certification, but is not a program requirement, and we don't anticipate that it will be.
Great. Let's see, prescribed burning. Is that, this may be a good one for Amy, given the importance of it in the Southeast. How does that fit into the Family Forest Carbon Program?
Well, it's very interesting that you're asking that, and I am familiar with who is asking that. So we're considering it. The Southeast, as we expand, absolutely, prescribed burning is a critical element to forest management, and we're working on quantifying what that would look like as a practice in this program, and how how many acreages and how often the entry could happen. With a 20-year agreement, can we ask landowners to go in every 3 to 5 years to maintain that burning regime? So we have to do some research on the science side. We also have to do some research on the social science side to see if that is compatible with the quality of carbon credit that we are trying to generate here. So, but absolutely yes. And most of the typical forest management practices you think of in the Southeast are being discussed at this time. So great question.
Great. And yeah, sitting here in New Mexico, that there may be pieces that we can help with. There's been some good research, sort of from a Western perspective, but I think some of the calculations around fire and carbon may be relevant. So yeah, we may talk more. And maybe this is a good transition to another question. And I think you may have covered this, but I might have missed it. Concrete plans to expand the program west.
Yeah, so we don't have concrete plans to expand the program west. It's one of many practices and geographies that we're currently working on in our product development team. There's a couple of things that we need to work out there, not the least of which is just kind of understanding the dynamics of a different forest type, but also the opportunities with the FIA plots themselves. So as you guys probably all know, just the FIA program is administered and the available data is different in the West than it is in the East. So all of this is surmountable. It's not keeping us from not paying attention to it, but it's probably something that we won't have, a pilot or really concrete plans for until next year.
Great. Let's see. So I think we've kind of touched on this, but maybe good to answer explicitly. Are timber harvests required in the program? In other words, can a forest owner collect the carbon payments without committing to forest harvests?
Yeah, again, it depends on the practice, but I can say that for the 5 practices that we like for Amy's prescribed burning practice, there will likely be specific intervention that would be required. But for the 5 practices that we have available right now, there's flexibility to incorporate management, but it's not a requirement.
Great. And this was probably a reference to a specific slide that I've lost track of, but Terry asks, for silvicultural harvests, is it a 25% reduction of basal area over the life of the contract, or was that per harvest prescription?
It's cumulative.
Okay.
So it's over the life of the contract.
Great. Great. Thanks for clarifying that.
And that's just for one, just again, Terry, that's for one practice. That's like different for the one that Amy's exploring, and for some of the other 4 or 5, I don't have them all memorized. Unfortunately, I'm not the expert forester here, but it does vary by practice. So I was just using that one as an example.
Okay, great. Another question came in. Let's see, just to clarify again, and this might have been for this particular slide you were showing, are you talking about carbon standing in the woods or the rate of sequestration? And tying on to that, do the products that have longer useful lives get somehow credit? But I don't think you guys are actually counting in the product side of carbon sequestration, are you?
Yes, sort of. Well, not sort of. The answer is yes. Just to go back to the first part of that question. So our methodology is different from existing IFM methodology in that it's measuring stock change instead of standing stocks. So that's where you see what is the impact of that intervention and how is it changing stocks over time, right? So that's the first piece that is different from other carbon accounting, other IFM methodologies. The second is that all IFM methodologies actually do account for harvested wood products, assuming that there is some value in harvested wood products over time. And it's really just how does that differ from what's happening in the baseline? So it's not product specific. It's just kind of addressing it conceptually. What is the baseline kind of going on? What's going on in the baseline in terms of harvesting? And there are efforts to create more specific harvested wood product methodologies. I know that there's one going on right now and assessing the potential carbon storage in building with wood and kind of large buildings using wood products. We're not leading that work. We're super supportive of it, but there is kind of an ongoing effort there as well.
Yeah, because I guess the logic there being that if we can, through improved forest management, have more of the wood going to longer lived products like building, etc. There's probably a carbon benefit there. And I'll just note that one of the things the Guild is trying to keep an eye on is both New England Forestry Foundation's work in the Northeast around some of this building with wood stuff, as well as the Climate Smart Wood Group that sort of starting out in Oregon. So there's a lot of exciting stuff. And I think there's some, as you just mentioned, Christine, there's some kind of cross benefits to tackling these. Let's see. Sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked here. So I think the next question was, are properties with existing conservation easements that allow for timber management eligible? So working forest conservation easements.
Yeah, you said it. As long as they're working forest conservation easement and they're not, they don't prohibit timber harvesting in any way, or at least they're not prohibiting it in a way that is more restrictive than our practice, because that wouldn't then be an additional benefit, then they are eligible.
Great. And this is may not be possible to answer this without sort of more specifics, but trying to keep it general still. We can imagine a stand that for whatever reason, past high grading or natural disturbance, it may be necessary silviculturally for the sort of future of the stand to remove more than 25% of the basal area. Is there a way to work in that sort of regeneration harvest with, well, maybe a regeneration harvest with the Family Forest Carbon Program?
Not using practices that restrict you from removing more than 25% of the basal area, right? So actually, one of the ways that we're thinking about developing more flexible guidance is how that basal area is sort of spaced out across the property at large. So maybe you want to do like a patch cut or something, and you want to concentrate your basal area in a single place. So we are working through that because we've heard some feedback from our natural resource professionals on having that flexibility. But if you want to do, for example, if you want to enroll in GMF, you want to enroll your 50 acres in our growing mature forest avoided high grading practice, and then you decide mid-contract, I really want to do a regen harvest. Well, that would not be compatible. That would be an intentional reversal, and there would be penalties associated with that. So you really want to think at the outset, is this forest actually eligible for this? Is this the right property for this practice? And try to get that very clear at the outset.
So I guess one of the things I'm hearing is, as foresters, we'd want to be very clear, really dive into the practices and make sure one understood the eligible practices for a particular region and how they apply to whatever parcel you're thinking about. It seems like the practices are really the key here. Yep,
definitely.
Great. Jumping back to sort of the extent of the program, do you have sort of an estimate for Rhode Island? When might you include Rhode Island in the program?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I think that could be a little ways away. I know we were looking at opportunities in Northern Connecticut, whether or not we could get there this year, and that's still an iffy decision. It's possible. We haven't decided confidently. So I think Rhode Island would be after that, maybe 24, if not longer.
Okay. Another question about the sort of scale of the program. Have you guys thought about working with county, state, or other public forests?
So right now, our program is designed to be a program for non-industrial private forests.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll add to that in that there's, reason for management on the perimeters of public lands, and we've aggregated outreach in the past, or I have thinking about along those lines. So we do have conversations with those entities, but with the lens of helping the private landowners that are adjacent.
Yeah, and it probably, as we think about some of those more publicly managed parcels, you can tend to aggregate, or they tend to be larger. So some of that, the need to focus in down to the 30-acre level maybe not be quite as relevant. So that makes sense. Let's see. Here's another sort of into the details on the sort of quantification. So Emma asks, how do you quantify additionality for properties that already have an easement or are part of current use? And I'm going to test myself to see if I'm understanding this. Am I right in thinking that it would be related to which control plots they're associated with?
That's right. Well, yes, and it's statistically equally likely, right? This is what we've determined, and we'll continue to refine our matching process, to be clear, as we learn more, that landowners enrolled in the program have the opportunity to enroll in easements or current use programs as does the control plots, right? So we should be picking up those in our matching process. We should be picking up landowners who are enrolled in easements and or current use programs to match to the landowners enrolled in our program that also are in those programs.
Would it be fair to say that the sort of existing distribution of easements is built into the baseline? Is that another way of saying what you said? Or am I off track there?
Not literally so one of the things that we're also trying to work on is, as you guys probably well know, the forest inventory analysis data is fuzzed to protect landowner confidentiality. And so there's actually a number of demographic or sort of socioeconomic data that we would also like to use in our matching process, just to help us really dig into the additionality. But we don't yet have a solution for that. What we do have is an agreement with the Forest Service to actually, we have a research agreement we've almost pinned it, and we're basically going to have a person working with the Forest Service to unfuzz this data under a confidentiality agreement, so that we can use it for our purposes, again protecting confidentiality, but then also lead the Forest Service, hopefully, to develop a way that others can use this data, because others have asked, can you unfuzz the data for various purposes? So hoping to kind of develop a use case for people that want this unfuzzy FIA data. And the biggest benefit for us in that, Xander, is like we could actually match our plots even more accurately, including some of that like easement data, things like that.
That is great. I really think that, yeah, because balancing, obviously confidentiality is essential, and we know from other government programs there are ways to maintain that while still connecting in some of that data, aggregating it before it leaves kind of the secure side of it, and help the rest of us understand these really crucial issues. So that's really encouraging, and I think that will really add to that next level of the program. Let's see, trying to get in a couple of more questions here. Would you use LiDAR and plot-based inventory data collected by state agencies for forest inventory?
Yeah, for sure. So our carbon accounting methodology requires the use of a national forest inventory at minimum. So we definitely have to rely on FIA, but anything we want to do above and beyond, there's no stipulation that says we couldn't, and it would help us potentially get better at targeting landowners who are more likely to be eligible or to qualify for these practices, and also just ensure that we're using as much data as possible to determine the additionality. So it's not something we've used yet, but are super open to it.
Great. Well, we should probably wrap up. We're right back at the top of the hour. And I want to thank you, Christine and Amy, for coming on, and remind folks we'll have this recorded and we'll share it. You know, maybe we'll see some of you. We have future webinars, one on forestry for bird habitat. I don't know if you saw that, Amy, but I know it's near and dear to your heart. Again, thanks everyone for participating. I think we'll have more conversations about this and for guild members on the webinar today. We want to continue this conversation. So if there are things we can do, whether it's getting out in the woods and sort of like the training coming up in Vermont, if we want to, the guild might be able to pitch in to try to host some of that. I think this is a really important avenue for kind of the future of forest stewardship. So I feel it's part of what we all need to learn. So I'm excited about it and glad we could have this chance to talk about it today. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Xander. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, hope to see everybody soon. Bye.
Bye.